Hey everybody, what's up? It's Booksy. Today is Thursday, April 13th. This is going to be an update for AMC. This is happening in the morning, so I'm not going to be talking about the price action on Thursday if you happen to watch in the afternoon or something or after market close. I won't be addressing that in this video. I might give you a little bit of thoughts on maybe what we could see over the next couple of days as possibilities. But what I'm mostly going to do is just kind of focus on a few things. This is not new, and I know that I get a lot of comments about jumping around or taking different approaches to things. I personally think that the more aggregate data that you have, the better. I just think that it's the more evidence that you have of one thing or one direction or one setup, the better. I don't think that it's enough to always just say like, hey, look, there's this thing right here. And I always rag on stuff like fib levels, but I'll use fib levels, and I'm going to use them probably in this video even to talk about some things. And it's like, those are just one part of possible setups, you know? And there's a litany of things that could happen at any given time. You have to be willing and ready to adapt and to change to those things. And we're at a place right now where we're basically at the end. It is April 13th. Originally, when I measured out our rotation, and I still believe this is accurate, it said April 27th. That to us we know was that court date for a while. That doesn't guarantee anything, but it also happens to fall around within a week of earnings. You know, the earnings report on May 5th. And there's a lot of stuff going on right now. You know, they announced their credit card launching. AMC did. You've got the Mario movie making box office records for animated feature. I mean, those are worldwide. I mean, it beat Frozen 2. That's a big deal. It's a post-pandemic movie that's usurping, you know, it's taking over the place of a movie that came out back in 2019, you know, before we all started closing our doors. So it's a big deal. It's a really big deal. And in addition to that, you have, you know, there's other cinema chains that are going bankrupt. AMC's talking about them having shares and this and that. And I mean, there's all kinds of stuff going on. We got Antara selling Ape. The news is just out off the chain right now. All right. But what hasn't really changed is the setup itself. There's not really anything that's brand new here. So I'm not going to be talking about anything that you haven't heard before. If I present to you something and I present it in a slightly different way, it's just another way of looking at it. Maybe I feel like it's necessary to simplify it. Maybe that's all I'm trying to do there. You know, you don't need to overthink that. Okay, so this is one way for me to illustrate possibilities here. So one thing that's really important and notable is volume. And I'm going to jump right in here. We're just going to talk about it for like 15 minutes, and I'm going to leave it at that. And I'm just going to tell you what my thoughts are over the next 2 weeks and why you really shouldn't be waiting for anyone to tell you to buy, you know, or to tell you to do anything really. This is the time, in my opinion, that I'm accumulating. Like, I'm not really that concerned with catching a knife. Don't really care. I'm looking specifically at the setup. I know where we are in my mind. I think that it's been pretty well proven. So I'm not really concerned about that. It's more or less just time. I don't know timing, and you don't know timing either. And neither does the next Joe Schmo on the next YouTube channel. So everybody's going to have different opinions about that. And all you can really do is just kind of look at the stock and sort of react. So one thing that's very notable is volume. And then lately on TradingView, the volume on like the 4 hour and below looks like it's blowing up. It looks huge. And if I were looking at this and I saw this chart right now, I would think, oh my gosh, we're about to go to the moon. And I don't really know exactly why this is. I have theories. I think that someone on my stream said it best when they said, really, it's about the percentage. And we have greatly diminished, right, percentage-wise, and how much volume is actually active in the market over the last couple of years. This looks like a massive amount of volume, percentage-wise. And when you compare that to the previous year, back in 2020 when we were running and into 2021, that volume was astronomically higher compared to where we are now. Well, this is really notable when you start zooming out to larger time frames. When you get to the daily or you get to the weekly, The volume in the present time frame, it's not that there's not a lot of volume. It's a decent chunk of volume. It's definitely an increase, but it's nothing compared to what we experienced on these first run-ups, or it's very little by comparison. It doesn't even really hold a strong candle just yet to these two run-ups, the one in March and the one in August. And I did the measurements on it, and the best I could tell is it's about 3 to 4 times less volume here. And unfortunately, again, the chart itself makes it look like this volume is almost surpassing, the volume in June, and that's just not the case. That's just not the case at all. Again, looking at something like the weekly can give you a better idea. Now, has there been an uptick in volume? I would say yeah. I think in this entire area from January 3rd forward, there was an uptick in volume. And I believe that it's similar to what we experienced October of 2020 going into the final spring in January. There was an uptick in volume here. And that to me is an indication of a long operator, the emu stepping in. And the emu stepping in is a big deal. So whether or not that emu is going to rip it from here and there's going to be a failed spring, there's really no spring to talk about except that after hours move, which I don't personally think is a good enough spring. I just don't believe it as a spring. I don't see that evidenced either on the other chart, the combo chart. There's no drop there. There's no significant drop there. I mean, there's a significant drop, don't get me wrong, and there's a lot of buying here, and it does look like we're jumping a creek, and that's a big deal, and I need you guys to take that seriously as I'm taking it seriously. But in my opinion, it's not the same, right? And when you look at something like Ape, again, it's kind of like, yeah, there's this huge uptick in volume, but what is this? We just jumped over another, price resistance, and we're just kind of chilling here, waiting to see if we fill the gap. And so there's a heavy amount of volume, right? And in this case, there's a heavy amount of volume in what seems to be kind of a random spot. And I've been talking about, again, this rotation for a long time. The rotation itself is about to be done. Like I said, the 27th. And I did another kind of illustration of this rotation. So I'm going to go back to the 4-hour, and it's these boxes. And if you're rotating from where I think roughly the center is to these outer points and then backwards, you can see that it's essentially finished. This S-curve is basically done. The only thing that hasn't happened yet, as far as we can tell, is that there's never been another push down. Like we were kind of coming down towards it, like we were going to make that final drop, and then we reversed. And I'll talk about that more at length in a minute. But what I did here is I went ahead and I took the reversal from this. I measured it out as best I could from where I think it would be, and we're sort of sitting on the line. It's not necessarily on the 13th, and I know you guys are like, wait a minute, you said the 27th. Well, yeah, I did, and I think that there's multiple ways of kind of analyzing this, but yeah, that still gives us another week, you know what I mean, right here of padding. I don't think this box is the end-all be-all, okay? It was more for me just to help build the structure of it. I was mostly concerned with this, and this is the rotation of that first entry. And again, you might say I don't know, man, that was a crazy time, high volatility, so on and so forth. Well, this has been a crazy time. We've had high volatility. We've had a massive increase in volatility here over time. And these are things that I'm purposely not ignoring. And I'm saying that it's entirely possible. When we dropped 30% after hours, basically, it was 20%. Then we went another 10% or whatever. And then we came back. I mean, there's totally a possibility here that this ends in this massive splash downward. And the volume profile here, in my opinion, and I agree, I think Stockfather and Clearly Thinking have it right. This doesn't look bad. This looks pretty good. You've got heavier volume on the buying. There's a nice swell here that happens. It's not all in the top, right? It's kind of rounding itself. It looks like accumulation more than it does distribution. But I don't know if that means that we're about to take off. It could mean that, yeah, this was a rising accumulation. This was the dip. It did happen to go low after hours, but ultimately maybe it was a failed spring. And all right, that's it. We're going to go ahead and cross and go. And again, that in and of itself, I think is substantiated. I don't think it's a bad argument. And I think if you're looking at this and you're kind of waiting for that final drop, you could end up being really disappointed. It could happen, but it might not. And the truth is that the market is flexible. And when we talk about stuff like LPS, which is the last point of support in a phase B or C rather, versus a spring in a phase C, the only difference is that the LPS is a failed spring. So how does that happen? It happens when volume doesn't show up for the spring. It happens when there's really not enough effort to push it low. And frankly, if the operator, the EMU, wants and has enough shares, if they don't want more shares, they're not going to care about necessarily enlisting the whole market in a big spring action if that's not their goal. Now, all of that being said, you could look at something like this and say, well, there it is. Like, it's happened. That's the rising accumulation you were looking for. There's the drop. It jumped the creek. It's just going to come back and check it and go. Absolutely possible. It's also possible that this comes down to 475, finds that support or near there, right? Maybe around $5, and then goes up to 590 and then still comes back down. And I'm going to show you what that would look like as well. It's like, I can sort of take this a million different ways right now. If you wanted to make a case that this is the buy-in, this is the volume that we were looking for, I don't disagree. This looks like a long operator moving. All right. I don't disagree. But we didn't actually get a spring. And I don't believe that, as close as this is to a double bottom, and it is, I don't believe that it necessarily has to be over. And the rotation actually does provide some more support for that. Basically, during this rotation, you can see the way I've mapped it out. There's a double touch. There's a double touch on this top. And what it amounts to is essentially you've set up this kind of preliminary support. You come back up and check it once, and then you come down, and there's a flush. And this actually goes lower. And this is, again, the rotation from the top back in June. And this flush actually comes lower, and it does present itself as a wick that goes below where we would expect the floor to be. Then it comes all the way back to the top. Then it goes all the way back down. And it ends up presenting itself like a 1, 2, 3, 4, almost 5 directional flush. It's kind of insane, right? Now, you guys are probably going to say immediately what I would think, and this is true, is that, hey, that was the stopping point for a big move. Like, there was a whole lot of selling and buying, but a whole lot of selling happening on these tops that caused this to sort of consolidate there. You can't necessarily expect there to be this widening at the end and then this breakout. And I've shown in other videos that this is actually the case. AMC does do this at the end. It actually does. It's not made up, There are frequent examples where you see AMC doing this very thing right here. And I did a video called an even atom bottom, and that's basically what it is it's a widening bottom that results in a couple different creek crosses. And so the first is the local creek cross, right? So you jump like the most local creek, which is usually like your downtrend. And then the second is a secondary creek cross, which is usually, in my experience anyways, this is usually kind of associated with the cat ears from wherever the top was. And again, I'll show you that in just a minute. And then there's a breakout. And sometimes this thing can have crazy flushes like this one did, back and forth here, double dipping down, and we've seen that before. One example of this kind of a buy-in with a double dip was the one that happened in March. If you look at that spring bottom, there's a dip like this, it does an upward move, and then it does almost the exact same thing all over again. They just copied and pasted it essentially beside itself, This is kind of what it looked like. You know what I mean? So absolutely, there's a possibility that this is sort of a compressed version of something like this. It is. I mean, it's exactly what it is. If you kind of stare at it for a second, you can see that. The problem is that there's not really a great way, even if we know this and we know this is a possibility, it's not enough. You have to have some kind of a metric. So if volume looks better than it did, if you've got this lower low, but you still have this gap down below, and there's some evidence that suggests that this isn't over, how do you know when you're supposed to buy? How do you know what confirmation is? And I'm going to say that it's actually very simple, okay? There's one thing that has never happened on AMC in the history of this stock coming down, all right? And that one thing is this. It has never broken out of one of these red trends. These are the parallels that I've been using and the other chart. It hasn't broken out of those. And then you can see the green downward trend. This is your main channel. And you can see that we've been stuck in this iteration, which is in the lower 50%. And that's it. And all you would need to do to confirm the change is that you'd basically have to break over 575. Well, that's exactly where we hit yesterday. We hit the line on the dot at 575 and it rejected. Could it go back again and try it again? Absolutely. Is it just a back up to a creek maybe before it tries again and breaks it? Possibly. Yeah. Totally could be. Or it could be that that's a rejection and we head lower. We don't know until we see the price action play out. But I will say this, no matter what, if you're waiting for $3.15, $3.50, that could come. Absolutely. This is another iteration of these guys. 1, 2, and then we're starting number 3. But it's entirely possible. We have to keep in mind that there's a possibility that in a phase C you have a failed spring, which would be that you don't ever get to, the place that you think you want to get to. I mean, it's entirely possible. So when I'm doing these things, I'm trying my best to keep an open mind about it and say, look, I agree, and I agree with, I'm saying that I essentially attest that, in order for us to have a breakout, we have to break, these are the levels I talked about in the last video. We have to break these levels, and we have to go above them. I changed this from 550 to 575 because of that uptrend, and I talked about that at length in the stream. And that was before we hit it, so I know it's going to be like, oh yeah. But we broke it, and then we came back, and we dropped beneath it again. You know what I mean? That's not good. That means you're back beneath this support. So yeah, there's like horizontal supports and resistances. There's this downtrend. There's all kinds of stuff you could be looking at and saying, this is it, this is it, this is it. And here's what I would suggest is that instead of worrying too much about exactly, where this is going to happen, I would focus most of my energy, and this is what I'm doing, on just watching this thing play out. And I did another version of these iterations, and they're identical, okay? And I posted this chart in the Discord. I talked about it on stream at length. And what this is it's just showing you the exact same thing I've shown before. I'm just doing it in a way that sort of illustrates it as a channel instead of illustrating it as a bunch of levels or illustrating it as just a bunch of fractals. This just illustrates it like a sine wave, and you can see the comparison is very compelling. Let's just put it that way. It's very, very one-to-one. And the same thing applies. All of these angles are the same. These red upward angles are the same. Okay, now I know on my screen that's going to say 8 degrees, but I copied and pasted them. So like you can see this right here, this guy is the same as this guy. It's the same. It's just scaling in trading view. And then they all have that sine wave. They all have the M cross, right? They come down beneath the creek, they cross it, they test it, they go back up, and then they fail. And this just happens to be a consistent angle. And it's the same lines I just showed you a minute ago. So where are we right now? Well, you can see we've started C. And I said, this is the chart that I had, and I said, I'm not 100% positive. We talked about it on stream yesterday. I'm not 100% positive about the wavelength. I don't think I can be. It's entirely possible, based on what I'm seeing here, right, with this setup, based on the way in which this thing has traditionally moved, that you do get a kind of intersection of the channel, as you can see, the channel, the red line, and the initial trend after the first bounce here. There's an initial trend on this first bounce on the bottom of the channel, and that initial trend seems to point to an intersection between the red line and the channel line, like the main channel line, okay? And I'm noticing that that's a possibility here as well. The problem is, and this is a big problem, I'm not 100% sure where to draw this channel, I found evidence to suggest that it really shouldn't be up here on the shoulder, even though I've got it on the shoulder here, that it should be right here. And it has to do with fib levels in this channel. There's like a fib discrepancy there. So yeah, on the main one, I actually have it lower right here. And then I went a little bit further and started trying to do comparisons. And so I'm looking at this and I'm thinking to myself, well, is it possible that was it? Like, is that the touch? Yeah, it could have been it. And the only thing that has happened is that we pushed up against this creek within the channel, came back down, and then bounced and jumped over it. And again, this is difficult because it doesn't have to be the same way every time, especially since we're coming to the end. But this is all that's happened every time. You push up against this creek, you come back down, you spring, you go to the top of the channel. And it's the same thing. The main difference here is volume profile looks considerably better. It looks more like accumulation than a distribution. It's also much smaller, right? Much less volume. So it's a very difficult chart for me to say like, oh, here's exactly where we are. I don't know that these wavelengths are 100% correct. And if I'm wrong about where this is, and I'm not 1,000% sure about it, right, then it can be kind of misleading. It can make you think that this move is already over. Well, notice what's happened here before. In the past, we've had this kind of push up that did get to the top of the red line, right? And then it rejected, and then it did it again. Now, this didn't happen in the March example, but it happened in November. We hit that line early, and then we rejected, and then it happened again. So is it possible that this pulls back? You know, it could come all the way back down to like 470 and then pump back up. Or is it just going to kind of coast sideways for a couple days and then have a random pump on Monday to 495 or whatever, excuse me, 597, right? Like there's absolutely that possibility, right? And that makes it very difficult. So a top is a top is a top. If it ends up being a top, then who cares, right? It's a top. Maybe I get it right on the nose right here with the 575. Maybe it happens later and it's a little higher. The point is, if this is going to top, it's going to top soon, right? And then we're going to have an idea of where this is. And if it turns out that was the top, then I'll get to adjust this wavelength and we're going to have a really strong idea, I think, about where we're heading next. And you'll notice that it's the same every time. Very, very similar, right? Every time. Even crazier is these are equal distance. So these are wavelengths, right? Which means that when you look at this top and you compare it to the other two tops, you'll see that it's the same. Like it's the same distance, which is kind of wild. And the same thing applied here. It's the same distance. So that means that this is like a planned, mathematically perfect sine wave, right? That's hitting these tops and bottoms. And it's doing this low bridge that kind of dips low for liquidity and it has this long grind to the upside before it distributes again. And it doesn't come as high. Well, again, what I'm doing is I'm taking this and these downward angles right here, these gray guys, they're all the same. And I'm just taking it and applying it to where the cat ears are. And now cat ears on this one are kind of low here. And they're coming down and you can see that's the first hit on it. So interpretation is going to be really important. Even if I were completely wrong and we were actually over here and blah, 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 like there still is a potential for downside. So it's not like make or break, right? It's more just a way to help, again, visualize and understand like this is the pattern, right? You have the first M, then you've got a drop that crosses the major downtrend here. You've got drop low for the bridge, then you go up, so on and so forth. Do the August style move, come back down and start the next iteration. And I noted that, yeah, there seems to be consistency in specifically like how far they are. I did Fib. I don't have the big one on here, but I did the Fibonacci channel, and these all hit like kind of the same distance away, and it seems to work really well. Another thing that I did is I looked at the distance here, and I'm going to do, where's my other chart? I meant to hit this one. I looked at the Fibonacci on these levels, and so these are equally Fibonacci'd apart based on the previous channel. Another thing I did was I looked at the Fib retracements on the downside, and you'll note that this is a 50% retracement right here. This is halfway down the move. This is a 50% retracement, and you'll notice that it pushes out and goes above the 618, probably to like the 707, although it's not on here. And then that's that. Well, you do the same thing here in the August style move. And again, you can use the after hours price action or not. It's still roughly the same. This 575 is like the 50% move, right? So when I looked at it, I was like, oh, okay, you know, whether or not you go low down to like 3 something, or you stay where it says, this is the pocket that you end up in. It's 350 between 311. So surprising nobody. Once again, it's kind of like look, if you're here, then we might be in for it for a little bit, and then this dip, honestly, could be the final kind of dip into earnings. And it's really hard to say. So is it possible this is it? And we're taking off right now. We're going to pull back to 236, the $4.78 and go, and we're going to leave this gap. Yeah. But it's also very possible that we don't. And I think that means that you have to have a plan. So when I look at this stuff and I'm observing the sequencing and I'm doing all this other stuff, in my mind, I'm accurate if I understood it theoretically correctly. Even if I'm not like 100% accurate on price targets or all this other stuff. The main thing here was to get to the end. And we're basically at the end. So we've got a week out, 10 days or whatever. I mean, it's not far, y'all. It's so close to where we thought that rotation was going to end. We're looking at this. It's layered. It looks like the final layer here. It looks like there's an opportunity here to dip down one more time, perhaps going into that earnings area and possibly even farther, and I don't personally, I'm not doing like high risk stuff right this second, even though, yeah, sure, you could make a lot of money if this thing explodes. I'm doing more like long-term stuff, but I think that it's necessary to look at this and just be realistic and say, okay, where do we then buy in? And it's no different. The other video I did kind of illustrated it. Look, if this doesn't break this channel, you're not running. Okay, if this doesn't break this uptrend, you're not running. If it doesn't break the 575, you're not running. This is just basic stuff. You have to get above these levels. This specific one is very important, right? This represents the supply zone that was established when we first came down here. And ultimately right here, we broke down from it and had a big giant mess of a wash. And then these guys represent the uptrends that have never been broken back out of. So yeah, if this pushes up, guys, I'm telling you right now, if it pulls back, or even if it just goes right now, if it pulls back and it goes to like 50%, and that's the full distance, and then it comes all the way up here, and it holds, and this is really important, it can't just be like a distribution. This happens to break a couple times here. Boom, boom, okay? It can't just push out and then slide back down. That's not enough. It has to then hold it and have continuance. Now, you might say, dude, that's way too far. I'm not waiting to $6.50, or I'm not waiting until it breaks 575. I want to get it now. Fine. But just know that it's entirely possible, based on everything that we've seen, it's entirely possible, y'all, that this is just the first M. You know what I mean? And that this is going to come down, and it could do something like this and then come really far down, And you can see that these also cross. The same thing happened here. These little middle S curves, they all cross that red line. So it would be like a long-winded sideways action. It's the same spot as they made a gap over here, right, on the S curve, that you'd have a gap here. Yeah, it's totally possible that this is the main spring action. Could it be faster than that? Sure. It could be. But these are things that I think that you need to take notice of, and you need to be willing to say, all right, if it breaks here, I need to have a plan. I'm not going to wait forever and let the opportunity go by. I don't want you guys to miss this run. I really do believe it's going to go to like $15. I'm dead serious. I don't think it's going to stop at 10. And if it does, well, it's not great. Okay? I honestly do believe that the math that I did early on, the numbers that we came up with, the $3.30, $3.50, even the $2.55 numbers, that those were all really realistic targets. And that ultimately, like, that's where the spring wanted to happen. Now, again, I can't promise that it's ever going to get there, that we don't have a failed spring. I can't even say that with certainty when this happens. All I know is that this is a strong possibility. And I think I've provided enough evidence over time for this. And being like one of the very few people, who are looking at these tops and saying, watch out. Hopefully I've earned your trust, at least enough to say, like, look, trust me when I say now is the time to be thinking about the future, like accumulating. Don't panic if you don't get the best deal. Don't try to catch the falling knife. Don't wait till the last possible second. If you have a plan that allows you to accumulate or to make your decisions. I'm not telling you to buy or sell anything, right? Just have a plan in mind. If it doesn't end up going down, what are you going to do? Did you miss the boat? No. There's going to be people out there that shame you for not catching this particular bottom. There's going to be people out there who boast saying, well, I thought this was the bottom and I was right. Like, okay, cool, man. I'm glad you got an extra 40%. The rest of this move is enough. You do not need to be greedy about it. This thing could run to $15. It's 200%. This thing can run to $21. It's 300%. Those are big, big numbers. And if you're worried, if you're really worried about, oh man, I missed that last little bit. Well, look, I'm sorry that you missed it. I am. I'm not sitting here saying that it wasn't predictable or this or that. It wasn't predictable because it was a massive downward drop after hours. But like, my point is like, look, do your due diligence now. Now is the time. And I know I went a little long on this video. I'm not doing another video today, okay? But now is the time to be thinking about what happens when this changes character. When do I make my move? And if it changes before this bottom comes, if it's happening now and it breaks out, what do I do? How do I protect that in case it's a flush, in case they use that as a trap? How do I protect myself in that trade? You all have the ability, you're all very smart, intelligent people. You have the ability to make those choices. I would suggest doing it now. I don't think there's any time to waste. Make your plan now. If you are just waiting and you're in waiting mode like I've been, and I've been waiting for a long time, right? If you've been in waiting mode, that's in my opinion, like that's past. I think it's gone. I think the window for waiting is over. I think we're in that last bit now. We really are. And it's time. It's time to start making decisions. Whether or not this goes up here, finds support above in the $6 area and runs, or it begins to drop again and comes back down beneath 470 and then slides all the way down to our expected price target, doesn't really matter. You got to make the decision to hit the button when it's time to hit the button. So be prepared. And I will talk to you guys tomorrow, which is Friday. Thanks, everybody.